Good afternoon, dear friends. It's me, Mary Morstan, and today we have a story that makes you think about the value and importance of life. Disgust and fear, there are the emotions that the average person feels when they think about death, or worse, about murder. Murder has been the subject of many studies. It's the most captivating, mysterious, and monstrous act a human being can commit. Thousands of scholarly articles and books have been written on the subject of murder. At the moment, we have fairly accurate data on the number of murders, the gender of perpetrator and the victim, their age range. We know the clearance rate and many other important details. Thanks to scientific developments in the forensic field, finding and exposing criminals has become much easier than it was even 30-40 years ago. Today's investigations are astonishing in their brutality and malice. The killer murdered his victims in cold blood, took the so-called prize, and fled under the cover of night. The Estonian SSR was considered quite advanced and free in Soviet times. There were discos and nightclubs, playing music by foreign artists, shops were full of food. Pepsi and chewing gums were freely available on every corner. And in restaurants you could enjoy a real hamburger with crispy onions and cheddar cheese. After, you could drink whiskey or even a cocktail. But even in such a seemingly beautiful environment, there was always room for evil, violence, and savagery. On 6 March 1982, in a Soviet city of Tallinn, on Valdehu Street, the corpse of a man was found with 7 deep stab wounds, from which it was obvious that the man had been killed deliberately, with special hatred. Despite all the attempts of the murderer to hide the intent and make everything look a banal robbery, as the victim's pockets were turned inside out, all personal belongings, wallet, and expensive shoes were missing. The police officers who came to the call had cold blood in their veins from what they saw. The perpetrator had not only stabbed and dropped the stranger, but had also cut out the victim's thigh and taken an impressive part of the muscles with him. Tallinn police officers were puzzled. What is this? How did the man lose part of his skin? Was it the work of dogs or a lost wild animal? Or is it a man who came to take revenge on the murdered man for something? After careful examination, most of the experts who saw the body had no doubts. The meat was not simply cut out because of the sadistic tendencies of the killer. It was cut out carefully with a knife, and in the place where the layer of muscle was the thickest. Was there really a cannibal in Soviet Tallinn? Such thoughts enveloped the inhabitants of the Estonian capital. The man couldn't be identified for a long time. The residents of Valdehu Street and its neighborhood had never seen him before, and there were no documents or the killer had taken them with him. They only managed to find out that the murder was probably committed around 3 o'clock in the morning, when dogs were barking a lot. They also found a taxi driver who was traveling along the street that night and saw the fight between the two men. But he couldn't identify or describe anyone, as he only saw the outlines of the figures in the distance by the light of a night lamp. Finally, the police were contacted by the wife of the murdered man, who had returned home from her parents and found that her husband hadn't been home for several days. It turned out that the murdered man was a sailor. His name was Eimar Vibo. However, the investigators gave nothing. Having found out the exact name of the murdered man, the detective didn't come one step closer to solving the mystery. For several months, They checked Weibo's contacts and friends, neighbors and co-workers, but couldn't find a single small, many important clue. It appeared that the sailor was a random victim of a criminal. The case of Eimar Weibo murder was taken under control of the first Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of the Estonian SSR. For 2 months, Tallinn police officers tried in vain to solve the case, but there were no clues or witnesses who could describe the attacker. The investigation was interrupted by unexpected second murder. A seemingly unrelated murder took place on 22nd May in the town of Jõhvi in the northeastern Estonia. There, 75 years old Belarusian senior Ivan Sivitsky was found murdered in his private house on Linnuki Street. The killer entered through 3 doors, stabbed the old man 4 times in the heart, then cut off his genitals and piece of meat from his thigh, as in the case of Weibo. The perpetrator also took a faux leather waistcoat and a flannel shirt from the murdered man's house. The murder of a retiree in Jõhvi was investigated by Järve District Department of Internal Affairs. Despite the similar handwriting, this case wasn't connected to the Valdeco Street murder. The investigation was once again stalled without any leads. Sivitsky was an ordinary retiree recently arrived from the Belarusian SSR to live closer to his daughters. It was established that the murdered man had conflicts with his 3 sons-in-law. One of them, previously convicted unemployed Vitaly Shamak, who abused alcohol and was a frequent participant in fights and robberies, came under suspicion. Soon he was detained. During the search in the house of the suspect, 4 knives and bloody clothes were found. Vitaly Shamak said that at the time when his father-in-law was killed, he was drinking with friends several kilometers away from the victim's house. These friends confirmed that suspects' non-involvement in the murder. The soiled clothes turned out to be Vitaly's property. The man noted that he simply didn't have time to wash them after another fight in which he was badly injured. Initially, the murder of Ivan Sivitsky in Jõhvi wasn't linked to the similar murder of Eimar Weibo in Tallinn. The Tallinn police still don't comment on why this happened despite such similar motives. 2 months later, at the end of July 1982, another body was found. In the forest between Laagri and Saue, 45 years old Evgenia Kaltsova was raped and stabbed to death while picking raspberries. Threatening her with a knife, the maniac took her into a thicket, there said her to undress and after raped and killed her. They stabbed her so hard that the blade pierced her body and reached the ground. The prey of the pervert was a bus ticket, 30 coins, and a pink underwear. The victim was unemployed, had been drinking, so her body was found only 2 months later after killing, by which time it was badly decomposed and damaged by wild animals. The identity of the murdered woman was established by a Russian-language newspaper found at the scene of the crime, which contained the address of a subscriber where the daughter of the murdered woman was found. Kaltsova's daughter identified her mother by her hairpins and buttons. Again, this murder and rape is not linked to any previous unsolved cases. By the end of summer, the police in Tallinn had 3 unsolved and confusing murders. Finally, the investigators began to work hard trying to connect these cases and threw all their energies on maximum attention to details in order to get on the trail of the criminal. But the killer was extremely careful and he managed to cover all traces. The investigators were helped to solve all the cases and find the criminal by a concerned resident of Tallinn, who worked as a driver at the trolleybus depot. On the 9th of October, the woman came to work and saw a piece of paper inserted into a typewriter on her colleague's desk. Curiosity didn't let her pass by. When she came closer, she read the lines that the letter was the text of a confession to the chief of the Tallinn Criminal Investigation Department. The woman was stunned by the surprise and continued reading. The text described the actions of 3 murders and 2 attempt murders committed by Johannes Hani. The desk on which this piece of paper was found belonged to Pille Hani, who also worked as a trolleybus driver. She was a Johan's wife. Pille was a stiff and taciturn person, brought up in a Protestant family and ready to run away from her parents. The girl suffered from a severe form of strabismus and even after the operation had to wear special glasses. She was hastily married for the first time at the age of 19, gave birth to a child, and when her husband left for the army, she began to seduce the employees of the office where she worked as a cleaner. When her husband found out about it after returning from the army, he started beating her. So she ran away, dropping off her mother-in-law's child, trained as a trolleybus driver, and worked in her profession for many years. She was quiet and unremarkable. A few years after her separation from her ex-husband, Pille began an active correspondence with a childhood friend whom she had known since she was 13 years old. He turned out to be a Johannes Andreas Hani. Born in Valg into the family of Baptist pastor Jan Hani, a family of 6 children. He was the eldest of 4 sons. John's parents were fanatically religious, didn't smoke, didn't drink alcohol, didn't swear. They wanted their eldest son to become a priest. They brought up their children in strictness, in accordance with the Bible. Before eating and before going to bed, they made them kneel down to read prayers. Every Sunday, they took them to church, and for any offense, they flogged them. Later, Johannes Andreas Hani said that because of the abuse, he hated his parents, especially his father. As a teenager, he was persecuted and sentenced to prison. He served his sentence in a juvenile colony in Viljandi. In 1978, he was convicted again, sentenced to 3 years in a prison. While in prison, he began to correspond with Pille, who lived in Tallinn. During 3 years of correspondence, young people fell in love with each other, and after leaving prison, on 11 December 1981, Johannes married 32 years old Pille Toomla. And it seemed that life was getting better. The happy couple thought about a beautiful future, joining children and old age together. But unfortunately, the years behind bars left an indelible mark on the man. After some time in marriage, Johannes began to show sympathy for the male sex. The man stopped having an intimate life with his wife, and if there was anything, it was in an extremely sophisticated form. He began to wear women's underwear, openly cheated with both women and men. Pille's love for Johannes was blind. She was not embarrassed by her husband's sexual proclivities, his strange behavior, or his early criminal record. She was not even embarrassed when on 6 March 1982, a man brought a piece of human meat and said he intended to eat it. It was part of the thigh of sailor Eimar Vibo. The cannibal couple roasted the human meat in a brand new frying pan, but couldn't only eat a little of it, as they found the taste and smell of the meat disgusting. Pille didn't even clean the pan of human fat and just threw it away. After that, the couple tried the human meat again after Savitsky murder. But again, they weren't happy with the taste. Later, the woman told the investigators that her husband's cruelty still made her a little worried. But his detailed stories about the murders incredibly turned her on, and after them, intimacy was especially vivid. As for the human meat, she cooked and ate it, fearing for her life, as she was afraid of disobeying her abnormal husband. But as time went on, Andrea began to realize that he had been wrong to let his wife in on his cruel secrets. On the night of 2nd August, he found a confession in her purse, written to the chief of police of Tallinn. Johannes decided to beat Pille to death with a hammer while she slept. But whether it was the pervert's hand that trembled or whether Pille sensed something wrong, the hammer slid over her head and the woman jumped out of bed, the second blow hitting her on the chin. Pille began to scream. Fearing that the screams would be heard by the neighbors, the murderer immediately persuaded the victim not to give him away, after which he gave her a bandage and drove her to the hospital, where she was treated, while he made up a story about an attack by an unknown man in the night street. But Pille already realized that sooner or later her husband would kill her and decided to hand him over to the authorities. She hid the hammer with which Johannes had beaten her and the bloody pillowcase, which could prove that she was just a victim. However, in order to silence his wife, he decided to tie her up with blood, and the two of them began to plot another murder. At first, they seriously discussed killing a small child or a student, but then they settled on a taxi driver. They chose the Nõmme district of Tallinn and the scene of the crime. Pille was supposed to open the car door so that her previously convicted husband wouldn't leave fingerprints, to distract the driver, and after the murder to drive the car away from the scene of the crime to the end of Tahitorn Street. Spare clothes were prepared to change into after the murder. For this purpose, they even played out a whole scene. They dressed up like a birthday party and stopped a taxi in the street. This time they both had knives. The first taxi driver was fabulously lucky. Sensing that couple's fake behavior, he refused to drive them and demanded they get out. A second taxi driver, Alar Kivi, agreed to pick them up. He took them to Ire Street. Pille got out of the Volga in order, according to the legend, to visit an acquaintance. At the time, Johannes Andreas Hani, who was sitting in the back seat, stabbed the taxi driver in the neck, but it wasn't fatal. Alar Kivi managed to grab the knife blade and pull it out of his neck. Pille, who was at the moment near the opened front door of the car, didn't dare to stop the driver despite her husband's demands. The wounded taxi driver managed to open the door and escape. The killer tried to chase him, but Alar Kivi managed to get the first house where locals helped him, called an ambulance at the police. Pille drove the Volga away from the scene. The car was abandoned on Cascade Boulevard. The criminal's loot was the driver's denim jacket and 27 coins. This was the last attempt of the perverts. On 10 October, Johannes Andreas Hani was arrested. He was summoned to the office of the director of the Palace Hotel, where he worked as a waiter, and police officers were waiting for him. Before that, in Johannes' absence, his flat was searched, during which irrefutable evidence was found. Eimar Vibo's belongings, Sivitsky clothes, Kaltsova's pink underwear, as well as knives, lockpicks, and homemade gun. Also, leather gloves and a police uniform. Everything found during the arrest search was laid out on a table in the director's office and presented to the detainee. The maniac confessed to everything, but said that he had no remorse and expressed no regret for the victims. He told the investigation that he chose his victims at random. After quarrels with his wife or trouble at work, he needed to blow off steam. He was driven to Valdehu Street by a business necessity. He worked as a postman also, and was delivering a telegram to Eimar Viba that day. He had come to Jõhvi city to visit a friend. The friend promised to give him the gun, but his wife didn't let Hani on their doorstep and sent him away. Angry at his failure, the ogre wandered among the private houses of the town until he saw an open door. That's how he came across Sivitsky. Kaltsova's murder followed a quarrel with his wife. The couple were on their way to Kloga, but on the way they had a falling out. Pilli traveled on alone, while her husband went in search of another victim. The maniac couldn't explain his predilection for cannibalism. The expert examination recognized him as a mentally unstable, but able to take full responsibility for his actions. The Tallinn Cannibal was only sorry for himself. At the trial, the maniac said, "I'll probably be shot." But the criminal didn't live to see the sentence. On the night of 6 November, Johannes Andreas Hani hanged himself in the cell of the Tallinn Pretrial Detention Center. Before that, he had written 3 letters: to the editor-in-chief of the magazine Novruz, to the investigator, and to his wife. The maniac's wife was also arrested and testified, but denied involvement in the act of cannibalism. Pilli was sentenced to 12 years as an accessory to the offenses, later reduced to 10 years and 4 months. She had a difficult time, was in constant conflict with other prisoners, and was assassinated 3 times. Nevertheless, she was granted amnesty in 1991, and the story of the cannibals of Tallinn had an unexpected continuation. Pilli immigrated to Finland, changed her name there, and she began to exploit her past without the slightest shame. Pilli became a regular on TV shows, gave many paid interviews to the press, and finally, in 2008, wrote the book I Loved a Predator. In her literary reflections, the cannibal justified herself and tried to blame her parents, wrong upbringing, circumstances, and her maniac husband, although in fact her criminal actions were voluntary and deliberate. During the investigation, Pilli Hani attributed to concealment of her husband's crimes to her love for him. She admitted that when she heard of the first murder, her intimate relationship with her husband was particularly passionate. She also admitted that she agreed to take part in the crime after her husband threatened to end all relations with her if she refused. The book shocked the Finnish public and psychiatrists, but never became a bestseller. 3 corpses and several attempts on their conscience. Luckily, the killers were caught and punished for what they deserved. Friends, tell us in the comments what you think about today's story. Was the verdict fair, and do you believe that John's wife was just a victim of circumstance and not a participant in the bloody atrocities? If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and give it a like. And now, I thank you for watching. Your Mary Morstan.